There are two kinds of people in the world. There are those who like to party all night long. And there are those who like to get an early start on the day. When the two meet, it's never pleasant. On July 1st of 2000, one meeting turns tragic. But what if it isn't an accident? In true crime, investigation and conviction may take years. But every detective knows that the crucial clue is always there, somewhere, in the first 72 hours.
Nobody should die that way.
I've never seen anything that horrific.
One of the duties of a pathologist is to determine the cause of death.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required. Download Veely now.
Make sure to like and subscribe.
There's just been a fatality in the Toronto suburb of Brampton, Ontario. Constable Gary Carty has been called to the scene. His only witness heard a crash, but saw nothing.
We didn't have a vehicle. We didn't have any real evidence. There was no sign of any broken glass. All we had was the dead body. And when we looked at the victim, we found that his pants were in fact clipped, very similar to a person that would have been riding a bicycle.
Carty and his team find a bicycle reflector. There's no bike at the scene, but there is a scratch on the road. Carty follows the scratch for 3/4 of a kilometer. Finally, he finds a mangled bike. And beyond it, an abandoned car. Carty concludes the car dragged the bike along with it.
So now we have our scene. We've got a car with a smashed windshield, a dent on the hood. We've got a bicycle about 100 meters away, and then another 700 meters from there, we've got the deceased.
Carty's next step is to find the car's owner. Normally, this would give him the reckless driver, but not in this case. It's a stolen car. The coroner has identified the victim as 65-year-old Frank Groves. Police go to Groves' house, less than a kilometer from the crash site.
I was off work that day because of it being a holiday. At the time, we had our house up for sale, and we were expecting someone to come through the house that day. And about 9 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. The people had said they weren't coming till 11, so I just thought, well, they'll come early. And they told me there had been an accident and that my husband had been killed instantly. I felt like I was gonna faint. I just kept going all around the house just saying, are you sure? Are you sure? Maybe he's okay, and you know, I was in shock, yes.
Arlene Groves and her husband Frank have been married for 42 years. They're such avid cyclists, they don't even own a car.
He always got up and went out on his bicycle and went to a local coffee shop and read the paper. He always left a note to see what he was up to for that day.
Frank Groves liked a clean neighborhood. He always kept a cardboard box on the back of his bike. He'd collect garbage along the way and dispose of it once he got to the coffee shop. Police tell Mrs. Groves they'll do everything in their power to find the driver of the car that killed her husband. Carty heads back to the scene of the accident. Something's been troubling him.
When something comes smashing through your windshield, the human factors are that you're going to go to the brakes first.
If the driver had slammed on the brakes, there'd be skid marks here. There are none. But there are skid marks at the construction site where the stolen car came to a sudden stop.
We know the brakes worked. We know they leave skid marks, those tires.
It's clear the driver didn't brake before or after he hit Frank Groves. It's no longer a case of hit and run. It's a homicide. But who would want to kill Frank Groves?
We went down to our forensics lab to see if we had any fingerprint evidence. And what we did find was on the passenger side of the vehicle, on the inside of the window, we had a size 9 footprint. And it was a very particular waffle pattern.
An anonymous Crime Stoppers tip leads police to Chuck Anderson, a local car thief. Carty goes to see Anderson at his apartment.
He opened the door, and sitting right at the doorstep was the very pair of running shoes that we were looking for. The sole pattern is identical, so the sense of elation was dramatic. We both felt like this was our man.
Police bring Anderson to the station house for questioning. Carty sends Anderson's shoes to the lab for forensic analysis. Anderson denies any knowledge of the murder. Though he fails to give Carty an alibi, Anderson agrees to take a polygraph.
He didn't pass, but he didn't fail. The results were inconclusive.
Carty has to let him go, but he's still the prime suspect. While the shoes are being examined at the lab, Carty steps up the pressure on Anderson.
Our suspect doesn't like all the attention that he's getting from the police. It's kind of cramping his style.
So Anderson points police to another local car thief named Shorty.
He identified this person as having the same shoes as he wore and as having been involved in an incident in July where he felt it was necessary to burn all of his clothes because he didn't want to be caught with any forensic evidence.
Police get a call from forensics.
There was glass found in the soles of his shoe. It was windshield glass, but it wasn't the same refractive index as the windshield glass that we used in the car that we had in question.
It appears Anderson may actually be telling the truth. Shorty is now Carty's best lead in the murder case. But finding him won't be easy.
The community is totally distrustful of the police, so nobody's really cooperating. None of these people are living at home. They're living on the street. They're living under assumed names.
Police finally locate Shorty. But he's not interested in answering any questions. Police have finally caught up with a 17-year-old car thief named Shorty. They hope he'll have some answers regarding the hit-and-run murder of cyclist Frank Groves.
I received a call from the Criminal Investigation Bureau at 22 Division. I was called in to observe this interview with Shorty.
The interview with Shorty was quite eventful. It became apparent quite quickly that this was no normal hit and run.
Shorty admits that in the early hours of July 1st, he and his cousin were with a man named Jeffrey Campbell. Campbell wanted to go downtown to buy drugs. but no one had a car. Campbell decided they'd steal one.
Shorty's indication to me was that Jeffrey Campbell was older. He had been in the pen, portrayed himself as a bad man when they were willing to do whatever he said out of respect, and eventually, I think a little bit may have been out of fear.
Shorty says Campbell spotted a cyclist up ahead of them.
And Campbell said words to the effect like, "Watch this," or "Should I?" And Shorty said, "Sure," thinking all along, according to Shorty, this was just a joke. Suddenly, to his amazement, Campbell accelerated the car and drove right through Frank Groves.
On impact, Shorty says he put his foot up against the windshield to stop it from caving in. This would explain the footprint, if Shorty's telling the truth.
I wasn't sure whether it was the entire truth or whether he was shading it a little to make himself sound better, but the indicators were absolute that he was present.
The thought that somebody could use a motor vehicle as a weapon in such a cold-blooded fashion was unbelievable.
Police questioned Shorty's cousin. He was riding in the back seat. He confirmed Shorty's story. But can police take a couple of known criminals at their word? They need to know more. Police learn Jeffrey Campbell is a drug dealer and petty thief. At 23, he already has a long list of priors. His record shows he's been violent since early childhood.
Things like lighting his young cousin's pajamas ablaze at a really young age, an age of 3, torturing animals. He was in and out of group homes and reform schools, training centers throughout his entire young life. During the course of our investigation, we found that, much to our surprise and amazement, Jeffrey Campbell was in jail.
Police discover Campbell is serving 3 months for an assault he committed just a few hours before Frank Groves was murdered. Police track down Campbell's girlfriend, Ellen, in the hope she knows what happened that night. Ellen tells them she and Campbell were at a field party. Everyone seemed to be having a good time.
And then someone borrows a flashlight off of Campbell's girlfriend, and he doesn't bring it back quick enough, and Campbell takes offense to this. So he quickly goes up to the fellow and punches him several times in the face. Good, serious, unprovoked assault for no reason.
Campbell thinks the assault victim is going to go to the police, so he chases after him in his girlfriend's car. He sideswipes the victim and forces him off the road, smashing both cars in the process.
Of course, the girlfriend is livid. She takes the car off of Campbell. And now Campbell's left with no wheels.
Campbell takes off with his buddies. They steal a car and come back to Ellen's apartment at 6 in the morning. Ellen says they spent the day there, watching the local news channel. Whenever the Brampton hit-and-run story came on, they'd laugh and high-five each other. But Ellen says Campbell never told her anything about hitting the man on the bike.
Mr. Campbell's girlfriend was cooperative, but only to a certain extent. We knew she was being protective of him.
Police are frustrated. They're convinced Campbell is the killer, but they don't have enough evidence to convict him. Arlene Groves is shocked to learn her husband was murdered.
I wanted to believe it was an accident. Didn't think anyone could be that cruel to purposely go behind someone and try to kill them. I just can't wrap my head around that kind of thing. To me, it's just too bizarre.
Police are determined to gather more evidence against Jeffrey Campbell. They start the day he's released from jail.
We set up physical surveillance on Jeffrey's girlfriend, who we knew would be going to pick him up.
The focus of the investigation had to rely heavily on Jeffrey Campbell incriminating himself and Jeffrey Campbell putting himself behind the wheel of the car.
Seven officers are involved in Campbell's surveillance, but somehow he slips away.
He got out of a car, jumped on the subway. Surveillance crew tried to get on the subway with him, missed the train.
Campbell is still missing the next morning. Before police can locate him, his girlfriend shows up at the station house. She's shaking with fear. She says she was out in her car with Campbell earlier in the day. They saw a cyclist up ahead of them. Campbell let out a yell and steered the car right toward him. Jeffrey Campbell's girlfriend, Ellen, has told police Campbell just attempted to run down another cyclist. Somehow, she managed to hold on to the steering wheel and stop the car.
He was unpredictable and unstable. She alternated between being in love with him and being terrified of him.
Detective Andrews steps up surveillance and gets warrants to wiretap Campbell's phone. Hearing Campbell's phone calls only intensifies police concerns.
We were able to capture Mr. Campbell threatening people, planning to commit acts of violence, bragging about acts of violence that he had committed. His behavior was so erratic and potentially dangerous to the public. We became extremely concerned.
Andrews has a tough call to make. He needs more evidence to convict Campbell of murder, but he also needs to keep the public's safety in mind. Campbell seems to be spinning out of control. His drug buys have escalated to armed robbery.
He actually attempted a robbery with a shotgun. And the robbery was stopped by the police who happened by.
He's also been making death threats.
Mr. Campbell was on a phone threatening his girlfriend in a horrifying manner. And we were sure that he was clicking the cylinder on a handgun. That was the point where I became fully aware that Mr. Campbell was in fact a ticking time bomb. He indicated in some conversations that he was willing to go out in a blaze of glory in a gunfight with the police. We couldn't risk allowing him to roam around in public any longer. And at about 7 o'clock on the morning of the 24th, I believe it was, I made the decision to arrest him.
Police finally corner Campbell in a motel parking lot.
The tension was palpable. You could feel it. All the information that we had led us to believe he was armed. We expected there to be gunplay. Everybody on that arrest team expected this to be a very, very high-risk takedown. And surprisingly, it didn't happen. He just came along quietly. It was as if he knew he was going to be arrested, and he resigned himself to that fact.
The first thing Cardi does is call Arlene Groves.
He said, Arlene, we've just made an arrest this morning. To me, it was relief more than anything. They finally caught somebody and he'd be in jail. It was one of the steps towards getting over all of this.
Campbell maintains he's innocent, but psychological testing indicates he's a psychopath.
Jeffrey Campbell scored on the psychopathy scale out of 40, scored a 38. That's higher than Paul Bernardo and Clifford Olson.
Police want Campbell sentenced as a dangerous offender, so he'll be kept in jail indefinitely.
There was no motive. There was no reason. He killed another human being just for the sheer fun of it. And that makes the thrill kill probably the most dangerous type of offender that there is out there.
Campbell pleads guilty to manslaughter, which would carry with it a 10 to 15-year prison sentence. But the dangerous offender application is successful. Jeffrey Campbell will spend the rest of his life behind bars.
If there's any solace to this, Frank didn't die in vain because this fella's in jail for life and he can't harm anyone else.
The Bible says, charity shall cover a multitude of sins. But a killer will settle for a dark night, a remote location, and the promise of a long, cold winter. In December of 1996, a trucker pulls into a rest stop in northern Ontario. First, he discovers it's closed for the season. Then he discovers something he was never meant to find. In true crime, investigation and conviction may take years. But every detective knows that the crucial clue is always there, somewhere in the first 72 hours. A body has just been found north of Bracebridge, Ontario. Local detectives Dan Mulligan and Kelly Grubb are assigned to the case.
The area where it was placed, I know that area very well. At night, it looks like you're in the middle of nowhere.
We found a lady of East Indian descent. There weren't any identifying features whatsoever left on the body. There wasn't any jewelry. There wasn't any rings on her fingers. There wasn't any wallet or purse or anything identifiable of any nature whatsoever.
For the detectives, everything points to murder.
So the next stage was to send out a broadcast to police agencies throughout Ontario and Canada to identify who the victim is.
Mulligan and Grubb are the first detectives on the scene. They'll follow the case wherever it leads. Tonight, that means taking the body several hundred kilometers south to Toronto for an autopsy. Thanks to the cold weather, the body has been well preserved. Pathologist Martin Queen is able to identify a number of injuries.
There were several blunt force injuries. However, there were no classic defensive wounds. This suggests that the victim was involved in a struggle, but was not able to respond and defend herself.
On the victim's neck, there are abrasions. In her eyes, there is blood. The cause of her death is found to be asphyxia, due to manual strangulation.
Brownish stains were identified on both hands. The exact nature of these were not clear to me. However, they were swabbed for ultimate DNA examination. On the breast area, there were numerous very unusual skin lesions, which at the time of the autopsy, I could not clearly identify.
The detectives have the cause of death and some intriguing clues, but they don't know the victim's identity. A missing persons officer calls Grubb later that day and tells him to turn on the local news. A Toronto man seeks the public's help in finding Nandita Advani, his common-law wife. He gives a detailed description of her that includes the jewelry she was wearing. He says Nandita went shopping 6 days ago and never came home. Mulligan and Grubb travel to Nandita's home in Little India. Their next step is a painful one, breaking the news of her murder to her common-law husband, Shashi Sharma. Shashi Sharma's 25-year-old son, Junior, answers the door. He asks the detectives to wait for his father to complete his devotions. Junior says Sharma Sr. is a Hindu priest and a doctor of herbal medicine, a pandit.
A number of people in various cultures had considerable faith in the healing powers of a pandit. And people would come to him and pay him significant sums of money to perform this, what they called a puja. And that was this spiritual healing ceremony.
In different ways, both men are distraught to learn of Nandita's death.
Father had a certain aloofness about him, a very strong confidence. Junior, on the other hand, was extremely surprised when we informed him that we had just found the victim.
Do they know of anyone who might want to hurt Nandita? Both men say no, at least not anymore. Senior tells the detectives that before Nandita lived with him, she was married to an abusive husband.
He essentially pointed the finger in the direction of the victim's former husband, whom she had been separated from for approximately a 2-year period. He indicated that there had been domestic problems.
Sharma Sr. used the power and respect he commanded as a pandit to help Nandita leave the relationship. He took her into his home. Over time, love blossomed. For the past 2 years, they've lived together as man and wife. The detectives have one more request of the Sharmas.
Naturally, the current common law partner of somebody who's died of suspicious nature is an immediate person of interest.
They ask father and son to provide DNA samples.
They both, on their consent, provided us with saliva samples, and readily did so. It was most definitely a learning experience for us. We don't have a lot of the East Indian culture in Muskoka, so we had to adjust to dealing with a new culture on a one-on-one basis.
Police interview Nandita's ex-husband.
The ex-husband was extremely concerned about the fact that we had found his former wife murdered. He was obviously saddened by that fact, and that appeared to us to be very genuine at the time. We confirmed his whereabouts during that given time period, and we were quite content with the alibi that he provided us with.
16 hours into the investigation, the police have no suspects.
We fan out and we interview as many people as possible in as short a time as possible, and we learn as much as possible.
We start conducting interviews with people trying to determine Things like the last time the victim was seen.
The difficulties primarily involved communicating with a culture that traditionally not that forthright with police to begin with. By the same token, they rallied behind the victim. We found out that the victim was a very well thought of lady. She was friendly. She was regarded as, everyone called her auntie.
Police learned Nandita hadn't been herself lately. People around her put it down to the painkillers she'd been on since a recent car accident. Asked if anyone wanted to hurt her, no one speaks up. Apparently, people feel uncomfortable talking about a revered pandit's family tragedy. Except for one young man. He says he used to be Sharma Jr.'s friend. But that was before Junior decided to show him his latest toy, a stun gun.
And he reached out and he nipped him with 50,000 volts very quickly. And he got the shock of his life. It leaves like a tiny cigarette burn type of mark on an individual's skin when it's applied.
Mulligan remembers the marks on Nandita's body. Did Shashi Sharma Jr. kill his stepmother? If so, why? In Toronto's Little India, two detectives from Northern Ontario finally have a lead in the Nandita Advani murder case. Nandita's stepson is known to possess stun guns, the kind of weapon police believe the killer used in his attack.
So it was critical for us, at that point in time, to locate these stun guns.
The detectives arrive at Shashi Sharma Sr.'s house with a search warrant. The faith healer lets them in. He says Junior is away in Fiji. The detectives ask Senior to wait outside while they conduct their search.
During the course of our search warrant, we seized a large variety of apparent medicines throughout the house.
Mulligan sends the drugs to the lab for analysis.
Junior's bedroom is locked up solid. We have the keys to that from Sharma Sr.
It was a normal, the bedroom was very disheveled, mind you, and already had a stereo system in there, a computer system as well.
Junior is a local computer technologist, so he's quite adept in electronics.
The detectives note something curious about Junior's setup.
He had the capability of flipping a toggle switch and being capable of listening to the phone conversation from a phone downstairs.
Whenever Mulligan searches a young man's room up north, he finds it pays to check the stereo speakers. It pays in Little India, too.
2 stun guns were wrapped up inside this plastic bag.
The detectives withhold news of their discovery from Sharma Sr. They don't want word getting back to Junior in Fiji. The stun guns are sent to an electronics specialist for analysis. One gun fails to function, but the other produces 50,000 volts from one 9-volt battery.
The local muscular contractions can be extremely powerful and extremely painful. So when the stun gun is being used for more than a few seconds on a person, it's really accounting for a torture.
Investigators compare the electrodes to the marks on the victim's body.
The distance between these paired lesions corresponded extremely well with the dimensions of the stun gun in question.
The findings don't prove this stun gun was involved in the crime, but dried blood found on the gun's handle might. The blood is sent for DNA analysis. Within a week, Junior returns from Fiji. The detectives put him under surveillance. Junior spends a lot of time helping his father.
Basically, Sharma Sr. and Sharma Jr. initially impress us as being almost connected at the hip.
The more police see of Senior, the less holy he looks.
People would come to him when they couldn't sell their home. They would think that the home was full of evil spirits. So he'd wave some garlic buds around and chant and walk away with a pocket full of cash and a smile on his face. And people honestly believed that he had these powers.
Police believe Senior is a con artist. Did he lie to them about his role in Nandita's murder? After a week of surveillance, the detectives have noticed something else. Sharma Sr. controls Junior's every move.
The father was extremely arrogant and domineering over Junior.
It seems highly unlikely that Junior acted alone. Back at the station house, Mulligan reviews the news videotape made after Nandita went missing.
He had described to a T the clothing that she was wearing at the time that she had left the residence on the 27th of November. Now, I don't know about yourself, but I couldn't tell you what my wife wore to work today. And yet he had obviously made note of precisely what she was wearing.
Senior makes a point of praising Nandita's good character. Mulligan wants to see that clip again.
During the course of those interviews, he had actually spoken of the victim in the past tense, after having just reported her missing.
Mulligan has begun to suspect both Senior and Junior are involved in the murder. He gets a call from Dr. Martin Queen.
Toxicologic analysis showed elevated level of blood pentazocine, which is a sedating narcotic drug.
Pentazocine is the pain reliever Nandita was on after her car accident. But the high level makes police think she may have been drugged. Could Sharma Sr. have given her the drug without her knowledge?
The victim would have been rendered unable to move her body in a normal manner, almost like a drunkenness.
But why would the Sharmas want to control her? A phone record check turns up someone who may know. The night before Nandita disappeared, there was a long call from her home to a woman named Tara Mullah. The detectives realize they've already interviewed Tara. Tara admits she knew Nandita better than she first let on.
She actually became a friend of the victims as a result of her visiting the pandit, Sharma Sr., in a professional sense. She had some demons she wanted to exercise, and she trusted in his talents.
Tara doesn't want to talk about the phone call. She's afraid of retribution from Sharma Sr.
People were of the firm belief that he had very significant and mystical powers over them. He indicated to people that he had the power to kill them, and many people were very, very fearful.
Sharma Sr. has let it be known he's a master of the dark forces of voodoo. Police have found their investigation into Nandita Advani's murder obstructed. Several potential witnesses have been silenced by their fear of voodoo. It's a new one on Detective Dan Mulligan.
This was one of the beliefs that these witnesses were coming out with. These were statements that were coming to us on a daily basis that were beyond belief. But these people honestly believed this individual had these powers.
Mulligan does what he always does in these situations. He asks Tara Mullah to do what's right by her friend. Eventually, Tara opens up.
The victim confided in this lady on a regular basis and indicated her fear. She wanted to leave. She was desperate to leave this relationship, although she indicated that if I leave, he will kill me.
The night before she disappeared, Nandita told Tara she thought Sharma Sr. had drugged her. He'd been trying to control her ever since she walked in on him when he was sexually abusing a young girl.
She was a witness to the sexual assault. She was going to give evidence against Sharma Sr. in her bid to escape this relationship and convict him.
Mulligan finally understands Sharma's motivation for the murder. Now that police have uncovered motive and opportunity, they await forensic analysis of the physical evidence.
Examination of the blood on the stun guns confirms that it matches the DNA profile of both the victim and Sharma Sr.
Sharma Sr.'s DNA sample had been collected in the first 72 hours of the investigation. The brown spots on the victim's hands also turn out to be Sr.'s blood. Police now believe they know what happened to Nandita Advani. Despite being drugged, Nandita had the strength to call Tara Mulla and confide in her.
And Junior's listening to this conversation. She's indicated that she may be providing evidence in the sexual assault. That's when it hits the fan. Junior comes running downstairs, and the scrap is on with Senior jumping in. There's no question that she put up a fight that day, and to the point where Junior had to run back upstairs, get the stun gun to incapacitate her.
Later that night, they put Nandita's body in the trunk of Junior's car and drove north of Toronto to cottage country.
Removing all her jewelry and not having any identification on her person was their means to thwart our efforts to identify the body. Not having been to that neck of the woods very often, no doubt they were confident that that body probably would not be located until the following spring when that picnic area was opened up again.
7 months after Nandita's body was discovered, the detectives make the arrests.
In certain respects, I think he even had himself fooled. At the time of arrest, he was in fact carrying what he referred to as his charms to ward off evil spirits. We suggested to him at the time that maybe his charm wasn't working today.
Shashi Sharma Jr. pled guilty to manslaughter. His father, Sharma Sr., to second-degree murder. A carefully considered murder plan. A plea to the public. Voodoo threats. In the end, nothing could cover Shashi Sharma's multitude of sins. He died in prison of a heart attack in 2003. They don't call pride a deadly sin for nothing. It can lead to good things in your life, mastery and excellence. It can also lead to cruelty and violence. Sometimes, if you're not careful, it can even lead to murder. In true crime, Investigation and conviction may take years. But every detective knows that the crucial clue is always there, somewhere in the first 72 hours. Detective Larry Edgar has just been dispatched to a quiet country road 3 hours east of Toronto. A motorist has discovered a body part.
On my arrival, we found a lower limb, a human lower limb. It was from the knee down, and the foot was attached. It appeared to have been dragged from the side of the road by animals or something up onto the surface of the roadway.
Edgar has his officers seal off and search the area. They soon find something else.
200 meters east of this, down the side of the embankment, very close to the water, we found another limb. And again, it was severed at the knee area and the foot was attached.
But that's all they find. The legs are sent to Professor Ian Taylor for analysis.
The striking thing about the severing of these limbs was that this had been done by somebody with considerable skill and care.
The joints have been severed perfectly. There are no unnecessary cuts.
It was almost as if somebody had taken a kind of professional pride in doing this unpleasant task well.
The killer appears to have medical knowledge and a surgeon's skill. But that's all the professor can say for sure. The legs could belong to a man or a woman. The victim's shoe size is all Detective Edgar has to go on.
I had a communication sent out to all police agencies in Canada identifying what our findings were and asking for their assistance to check their missing person files and contact us if they had anybody fitting this description.
A detective with the Ontario Provincial Police responds to the memo.
Gus Riddell called me and advised me they had a missing person from Scarborough. And her shoe size was size 8, which would match the size that we were looking for.
Riddell gives Edgar a case history. He says a woman named Audrey Hong recently came to his office to report her sister Melissa missing. The two sisters were supposed to meet for dinner the other night, but Melissa never showed up. Melissa Hong is an accomplished violinist. She came to Canada 5 years ago from China.
The sister had never dealt with Canadian police before. She was extremely nervous around us. She wasn't telling us everything because she didn't really trust us. I came to understand that later, that their mistrust of police in China and in Hong Kong is tremendous.
Detectives Edgar and Riddell may be working the same case, but they need to make sure. They decide to meet at Audrey's apartment.
We go back to the sister and ask her if we can look at some of her sister's shoes.
The shoes and severed legs are sent to forensic expert Brian Dalrymple for comparison.
When I cut the tops off, I noticed that there was faint ridge detail, similar to fingerprint detail, recorded on the insole of that shoe.
Dalrymple then creates plaster casts of the feet for comparison to the photographs.
An impression of the bottom of the foot is just as good for identification purposes as is a fingerprint or a palm print. I was able to determine that those shoes had been worn by these feet. This was our victim.
Riddell breaks the news to Audrey. He gently asks for more information. Audrey says her sister had only been living with her for a few weeks. Melissa had just broken up with her live-in boyfriend. She needed a place to stay. The ex-boyfriend's name is Rui Wen Pan. He owns a variety store in Chinatown. Audrey ends the interview. she's too upset to answer any more questions. Detective Riddell goes to see Pan at his store. Riddell tells Pan he's investigating Melissa Hong's disappearance. He asks about their relationship.
He said to me they had a very loving relationship. She doted on him, and he doted on her. And there wasn't a thing he wouldn't do for her. He never indicated any arguments or any reason why she would run away from him.
Pan says he was very upset when Melissa left him. He's still upset, but he hasn't seen her since. If police want to find out what happened to her, Pan suggests they talk to her new lover, Ross Hunter. Hunter is Melissa's English professor. The two of them have been spending a lot of time together. When he came over for lunch one day, she flirted with him in front of Pan. A month later, she moved out. Riddell goes to see Hunter at the university. He asks about his relationship with Melissa Hong.
And he tells me he had great feelings for the victim, however, never had an opportunity to follow anything up.
Hunter confesses to flirting with Melissa that day, but he says she refused his advances. When he called a few days later to ask her out, Pan got on the line and told him to stay away. Melissa dropped out of his class. Hunter hasn't seen her since. Why would Hunter call Melissa if he knew she was living with Pan? Hunter says Melissa is his type.
I'm thinking, boy, this guy, he's infatuated by Chinese females.
Professor Hunter remembers one other thing. He says the day he had lunch with Melissa, she mentioned being worried about her immigration status. Was Melissa in the country illegally, smuggled in by human traffickers? If she was, that alone could explain her fate.
Some of the immigrants that were coming here were actually going missing. They disappeared if they couldn't pay their freight, which at that time was about $15,000 to $16,000 American.
It's been a month since the severed limbs were first discovered. Police are certain of the victim's identity, but are no closer to finding her killer. Police are investigating the murder of violinist Melissa Hong. Detective Gus Riddell wants to know what Melissa was doing the day she disappeared. He learned she gave a young girl a violin lesson. But when he visits the girl's mother, Riddell doesn't think to bring an interpreter.
I had absolutely no knowledge of the Asian community prior to this. I made lots of mistakes. There's a big thing in the Chinese community, and it's called face. And if you don't give somebody respect, and that means even taking your shoes off, walking in the front door, you're lost immediately.
Riddell tells Mrs. Fong he's investigating Melissa's murder. He asks if anything unusual happened the day of the violin lesson. Mrs. Fong appears not to understand, but the detective can tell there's more than just a language barrier between them.
Me coming in and realizing very quickly that they didn't trust a white police officer was difficult to swallow.
Melissa Hong's murder has shocked the Chinese community. At the memorial service, the community gathers to share her sister Audrey's grief.
Everybody thought that the victim was a marvelous young girl with all kinds of potential, and nobody could understand what went wrong.
The people close to Melissa aren't telling police everything. An undercover officer attends the service and reports back.
Mr. Pan was very distraught and upset by her death, and he was extremely emotional about the whole thing.
Melissa's immigration file arrives. It shows she came to Canada with an official visa and had recently applied for landed immigrant status. Everything is in order. The illegal immigration murder theory can be ruled out. Police must now focus on what they know about the killer.
We knew that it would be an expert that would have to have cut those limbs.
Riddell goes back to Professor Hunter and asks to see his university transcripts.
This fellow did not have any expertise whatsoever in the medical field.
Riddell is convinced Hunter is not the killer. The detective is called back to headquarters. Audrey Hong wants to see him. She says it's important.
She was trusting me a little bit more. She told me exactly what I wish she told me the first time.
Audrey says Pan used to abuse Melissa.
And she was extremely worried. He used to hit her a lot. How he even treated her in public, very domineering and obsessive about her.
Audrey tells Riddell that Mrs. Fong wants to see him as well. This time, Riddell comes prepared.
I took one of our Chinese females from our office, and they struck up such a bond. It was amazing. And I sort of just sat there with my notebook poised waiting until somebody spoke English.
Mrs. Fong says the day Melissa gave her daughter the violin lesson, Pan showed up at the front door with a letter.
When the victim read the letter, she became very upset, distraught. She cut the lesson short. If she went left, then she would have been going to the bus stop. If she walked out and turned to the right, she would have been heading back for his store to tell him off.
Riddell asks Pan if Melissa came to his store after he gave her the letter. Pan says no, it was a goodbye letter. He wanted nothing further to do with her. To prove it, he offers Riddell a copy of the letter. He also gives Riddell a satchel he says Melissa left behind when she moved out. Riddell and Edgar have the letter translated.
This is a quotation. Now you have not only broken your promise and also destroyed everything. You don't know how cheap you have become. Don't know how many dirty men you have slept with. Now in my heart, you are already the most dirty, cheap, and shameful woman in the world.
The detectives can see why Melissa cut the violin lesson short. But they also know nasty words don't always lead to murder. As they ponder their next move, the detectives make a discovery that will blow this case wide open. Police may have a suspect in the Melissa Hong murder case, but they don't have enough evidence to be sure. When Detective Riddell opens the satchel Rui Wen Pan gave him, that starts to change.
This satchel he should have gone through before he gave it to the police, because there was documents in there about his past in China. He had been in medical schooling there, and the marks he got were extremely high.
Police now know Pan has the medical knowledge needed to be Melissa's killer. They place him under surveillance. OPP detective Andy Kaknavicius is an officer on the team.
Every minute of the day, we had eyes on him. He had a very, very simple day-to-day routine. and we had no problem keeping track of him.
2 months of surveillance turn up nothing. Detective Riddell decides to put what he has learned about Chinese culture to use.
In the Asian culture, if you lived in a small village in China and your wife left you, you would wear a green hat for that sign that you're a cast-aside husband. I was trying to get the better of him, and I was trying to make him lose face a little bit, just to see if I could get a reaction out of him. He disliked that immensely.
We were aware those pressures were being put on him, and our job remained the same. Watch, and don't miss a thing. His daily routine on that particular day was just that, his daily routine. There was nothing extraordinary until the evening.
That evening, Pan changes his routine. At midnight, he leaves his house and heads for the beaches area of Toronto.
He was rummaging around, and he pulled out a plastic bag. And he walked very casually towards this little park alongside Lake Ontario. He walked off the boardwalk onto the sand of the beach and diagonally started for the water line. And I could see a concrete pier there.
Detective Kaknavicius can't clearly see what Pan is doing, but it's a quiet night. The detective hears something drop in the water.
Shortly after that, he came off that pier, but the bag was completely empty. I got back to the car, radioed with enormous excitement, almost out of breath, to the rest of the team that he just threw something in the lake, stay on him.
The surveillance team watch Pan pick up 2 friends and head home. While Pan was at the beach, police bugged his house. Now they listen in.
He's talking about what it's like in Canada, you know. He talks about the law. Unless you have a murder weapon, unless you know where it happened, unless you heard her scream, then you have nothing and the judge will throw it out.
At the beach, Detective Riddell waits for the divers. They emerge with a major find. 5 knives and a cleaver. The carving tools are sent to the lab. But police fear they've been in the water so long, all trace evidence has been washed away.
There was a feeling of great excitement when we located this fingerprint because it would not have been my thought that a knife lying in Lake Ontario for several hours would still retain fingerprint detail, but that in fact was the case.
When the print on the knife is compared to Pan's fingerprints, the police have a match. Police know the knives have been used by Pan, dumped in the lake by Pan, and are sharp enough to dismember a body. The case against Rui Wen Pan is strong enough to make an arrest. Police now think they know what happened to Melissa Hong the day she disappeared. Pan's letter was an attack on Melissa's pride. He believed his words would force a confrontation. He was right.
I believe that she turned right and she was intercepted by him or he. She got into the store and they had a huge argument.
But Pan was prepared to do far more than argue. Where he killed Melissa is not known. What is known is the pride he took in being able to disarticulate her limbs so expertly. The idea of Melissa leaving him was intolerable. He couldn't bear the shame of it. He thought he could commit the perfect crime, but he was wrong. The detectives knew the killer had medical training less than 72 hours into the investigation. But it wasn't Pan's surgical skill alone that led to his downfall.
Mr. Pan's arrogance really played a big part in his conviction, giving us that whole satchel of all his marks. And why he didn't look through that before he gave us just speaks to his arrogance. He thought it was just some old bag that she'd left in the house. Well, sorry for your luck.
Melissa had her pride too, enough to walk away from Pan. The tragedy is, when he insulted her, she couldn't just keep on walking.
It was sad for me because she was one of these extremely pure, innocent people who was extremely gifted. She was marvelous.
For the murder of Melissa Hong, Rui Wen Pan is sentenced to life in prison. The one thing you'd expect a wealthy suburb to be is safe. But that's not always the case. A man's wife is late for work at the family business. He calls a neighbor. She offers to check on his wife. The front door is unlocked. The man's wife must still be at home. Apparently, she's been getting tonight's dinner ready before she leaves for work. But why is the house so quiet? In true crime, investigation and conviction may take years. But every detective knows that the crucial clue is always there, somewhere in the first 72 hours. Dennis Berg, a successful Toronto jeweler, comes home to discover his wife Dolores has been murdered. The crime scene has been sealed off. Berg is not allowed inside. Detective Roman Boychuk of Peel Regional Police is assigned to the case.
The first thing that struck me was that there was no signs of forced entry to the residence.
The house has been undergoing renovations, but everything else looks normal and undisturbed. In the kitchen, there's a partially prepared meal. Upstairs, there's some leftover breakfast on a bedroom vanity table. Expensive jewelry has been left out in plain sight. In the bathroom, Boychuk discovers a grisly murder scene.
The victim was found nude in the bathroom, lying on her back. And there was quite a number of injuries on her body. There was no large pools of blood visible. We would have expected to see a lot more blood than we did.
As Boychuk surveys the scene, forensic identification officer Frank Kabchik arrives to lead the forensic investigation.
She'd been severely beaten. She'd put up a struggle. There was also evidence on the body to indicate that she'd been washed down after the attack had taken place. Her hair was wet when we first found her, and again, the skin almost had a damp feeling to it. There was also some visible signs of some sort of strangulation about her throat area.
Before Kabchik begins collecting forensic evidence, he carefully seals the victim's hands to preserve any clues they may contain. He collects a small smear of blood on the shower tap.
Upon walking in the master bedroom, I started noticing that the bed was haphazardly made. We flipped the comforter. The mattress was moved back, and this exposed a fairly large blood stain that was on the box spring itself.
Kavchik also finds semen on the mattress. He collects a sample and sends it to the Center of Forensic Sciences. As Kavchik surveys the rest of the bedroom, he gets a picture of the struggle that must have taken place. The crime scene tells Kavchik something very specific about the murderer.
To deal with the body of the deceased, taking her into the bathroom and washing her down, you get a feeling that the person that's responsible for this is somebody that's comfortable in the residence.
Both detectives are convinced this is no random act of violence.
We came to the conclusion that the person that killed the victim was known to her.
Police focus their attention on the person closest to the victim, her husband, Dennis Berg. They question Berg about his movements earlier that day.
This is a very critical juncture in the investigation because he may be our killer, and we have to question him, and it may be our only chance to get information from him.
Berg is calm during the interview. He tells police he and his wife had a typical morning together. He showed her some new pieces of jewelry he was bringing to the store. She planned on joining him there early that afternoon, as she customarily did. Berg says after he left, Dolores would have locked the door and turned on the alarm the same way she did every morning. Police ask if Berg knows anyone who may have wanted to harm his wife. Berg tells police he doesn't. But with the house being renovated, there was a constant stream of tradesmen coming in and going out. He didn't deal with them, his wife did. He says she made a note of every tradesman who worked on the house. Their names can be found in her electronic Rolodex, along with the names of all their family, friends, and business associates. After his interview with the police, Dennis Berg does something no one would expect of a truly bereaved husband.
The victim's husband had actually gone to work and opened his store for business, which again we found to be very strange and something that was not what we expect.
Police continue to suspect Dennis Berg. Police check out Berg's account of his actions on the day of his wife's murder. A security guard at the jewelry store reports Berg did something unusual that day.
He had seen the victim's husband coming to the mall to open his store at a much earlier time than normal. And the time that this witness identified was not consistent with the times that the husband had given to the police when he was interviewed.
It appears Dennis Berg has lied to the police. But Boychuk can't allow himself to get tunnel vision. He has to eliminate all the other suspects. That includes the long list of tradesmen working on the Berg's house. Boychuk sets up a task force room where forensic and investigative officers can exchange information. He asks John Nielsen to help focus the investigation.
We need to know everything we can about the victim, about the husband, about their business, about their friends. And we started to analyze and try and track the victim's movements, basically moment by moment, and just backtracking to where and who she had dealt with.
It turns out that the victim placed a call to the pool company at about 8:20 in the morning. The call was then returned at 9:42 in the morning. So we knew that at 9:42 in the morning, she was still alive.
At 9:42, Dennis Berg can clearly be seen on his store's security camera. The records show Berg turned off his store alarm at the usual time and did not turn the alarm on again until he left to check on his wife. The security guard was simply mistaken.
And because the husband was on tape and the tape hadn't been altered, we knew he physically could not have committed the murder. However, we still had to discount the possibility that he had hired someone else to commit the murder.
It's a plausible murder theory, But is it true? Dolores Berg has been brutally murdered in her own home. Police suspect her husband may have hired someone to kill her. But why? Police searched the Bergs' background for a motive. They talk to family, friends, and neighbors. They even translate the letters Dolores sent her family in Mexico. All they learn is that the Bergs were a happily married couple.
Based on all of the investigation that we did, we eventually eliminated him as a suspect in his wife's murder. He didn't show a lot of outward emotion, which to some people would be a sign that he didn't care or that he may have had involvement, but no, that was just his nature.
Eliminating Dennis Berg as a suspect does more than put the investigation back at square one.
To come to the realization it's not the husband, and what are you faced with? And the prospect of this animal being out on the street is a scary, scary thought.
An autopsy confirms Dolores Berg was strangled and sexually assaulted. Her hands show signs of defensive injuries. She may have scratched her attacker. Pam Newell, at the Center of Forensic Sciences, evaluates the evidence gathered at the crime scene.
If there's evidence of defensive injuries, fingernails, either fingernail scrapings or the entire fingernails are collected.
Test results on the seminal fluid found at the crime scene turn up something unexpected. The fluid contains no sperm.
We know that it's seminal fluid. We know that there are no sperm, but we don't know why there are no sperm.
Without the packets of DNA contained in the sperm, the sample cannot be matched to a suspect. Lab tests on the blood smear from the shower tap are also inconclusive.
You have to remember, at this period, the whole DNA field was in its infancy. At that point in time, the amount of material we needed to get a DNA profile was quite substantial.
Police know DNA alone may not provide enough evidence to confirm the killer's identity.
The one thing that we could never count on was that we would provide or get sufficient forensic evidence that would ultimately solidify our case.
Dennis Berg is anxious to help police. He takes them through the crime scene and points out what is missing: a brass bedside lamp, an alarm clock, and his wife's cell phone. The missing items are a mystery to the police. Why would the murderer take these items and not the jewelry? As the investigation continues, police learn Dolores Berg was very careful about the people she let into the house.
We had tradespeople that we interviewed who indicated that when they rang the doorbell, she would first confirm who the person was before she would open the door. Even when she was home, the alarm was activated.
Police now believe Dolores Berg willingly opened the door to her killer. After interviewing dozens of people listed in Dolores Berg's Rolodex, police finally come across someone who merits a closer look: a chimney sweep named Martin.
This individual had a criminal record involving violence towards women. He also had been known to frequent prostitutes. So because of the sexual nature of this homicide, he was looked at as a suspect.
The chimney sweep says he was miles away from the Berg house the day of the murder. Police drive the route to see if he had time to commit the murder and return to his work site without arousing suspicion. The chimney sweep's alibi checks out. He's eliminated as a suspect.
I'd liken it to a little bit of a roller coaster ride. As we were going through and dealing with people that had recent contact with it, we would find points of interest that would, heighten that person in a suspect scale. The downside to that was eventually we would deal with them, interview them, they would provide an alibi, that alibi would be confirmed.
1 week after the murder, investigators interview a carpet salesman identified in Dolores Berg's files as Ernie Westergaard. Police know he was in the Bergs' house many times, but when he's asked about his business there, Westergaard doesn't want to talk about it. Police question his carpet store co-workers. They report Westergaard went out on a call the day of the murder and never returned. When he did come back to work the next day, they noticed something very unusual.
In the days after the murder, all of his co-workers noticed that he appeared to be wearing makeup. We're talking about 10 or 12 people who, in no uncertain terms, said that this was very, very heavily applied tan makeup, as if it was an attempt to cover up physical injuries.
Ernie Westergaard is placed under surveillance. Cab Chick is asked to collect Westergaard's trash and sort through it for evidence. What he finds seems to confirm the carpet worker's story about Westergaard using makeup.
What we ended up getting from his garbage were some makeup pad applicators.
Police find something else that's unusual.
Found all these little slips of torn up paper, and I sat at my desk for the next couple of days, and it was like a big jigsaw puzzle. When the thing was all put back together, what was of importance was it was the date that the homicide had taken place. What it appeared that Westergaard was trying to do was fabricate an alibi and to put himself somewhere other than the crime scene using these bogus work orders.
As Mr. Westergaard became a suspect, a focus of the investigation was to probe his past to see if there was any similar behavior.
Police learn Westergaard has a criminal record that includes a conviction for sexual assault. Police now have a strong suspect in the Dolores Berg murder case. But without hard evidence, they know Ernie Westergaard will go free. Dolores Berg has been brutally murdered. Police think they have her killer in their sights, but they need more evidence.
One thing that we found out was that he, in the time before the homicide, was frequenting the dating services. We found a woman who he had met, actually, through the dating lines.
Police bring the woman in for questioning. They want to know what she can tell them about Ernie Westergaard. Her name is Anna. She tells police she was violently sexually assaulted by Westergaard, but was afraid to press charges. Westergaard had convinced her he was a successful businessman.
He was a salesman. He was smooth, he was chatty, he was charming, he was friendly. It was almost as if he had a Jekyll and Hyde personality. You know, when he wanted something from you, he would be the charmer. When you didn't give him what he wanted, he would turn into Mr. Hyde.
Anna says that she was so traumatized that she's never told anyone about the experience until now. 3 months after Dolores Berg's murder, Ernie Westergaard is arrested for Anna's sexual assault and placed in police custody.
Once we felt that the threat to the community had been removed, and that was done once he'd been arrested, time was on our side.
It takes 5 months for a new type of DNA testing to be developed that might yield results on the crime scene samples. Finally, police catch a break. The DNA results from the fingernail scrapings point straight to Ernie Westergaard.
We, in fact, were able to say he was the only person on Earth that could have been responsible.
Police learned why there was no sperm in the semen recovered from the victim's mattress. Years before, Westergaard had a vasectomy. Police now think they know what happened the day of the murder. Westergaard went to the house knowing he would find Dolores Berg alone. She recognized him from his previous visits. But this visit was unscheduled. Westergaard believed that he could use his charms to seduce Dolores Berg into having sex with him. When she refused him, Westergaard became so angry he attacked her.
She fought, there's no question. She fought very hard for her life. And it was that fight that caused the injuries that eventually gave us the physical evidence that solved the case.
After the murder, Westergaard tried to get rid of all the evidence. He made a point of tidying up the room.
He took things that he was worried about might connect him to the crime. He did work for a short time as a civilian member of a police agency. He was also an auxiliary police officer. So he had some knowledge of police strategies and tactics and procedures, and I think that is something that he would have attempted to use to his advantage.
But Westergaard's efforts were futile.
All the items, if you think about it, that were used to convict Westergaard, the semen stain, the blood evidence in the master bedroom, the nail clippings from the victim, all that was basically recovered within the first 72 hours.
When Westergaard is confronted with the evidence, he maintains he's innocent.
He asserted on a number of occasions that he has never touched a woman that didn't want to be touched. So in his own mind, he's convinced himself that he's blameless.
For the murder of Dolores Berg, Ernest Westergaard is sentenced to life imprisonment with no chance of parole for 25 years.